welcome to Film Trace. This is a podcast where we trace the life of a film from conception to production, all the way to release and reception. Today we have a special guest. We'll call him Drax. Do you want your full name, Ryan? Or you want to go by the Drax?
Drax
it's up
is
to you.
Fine. I like that.
Drax is fine. So he is an old high school friend who lives out in California. He's in the biz, as they say. Hendricks, what do you do in the business? Tell us what you do.
Well, I basically am a production accountant. I monitor the budget day to day to make sure that we're meeting our targets. And the better part of it is I get to pay people, and they like to see me. And that's more or less what I do for day to day. I also do a little bit of budgeting, like line producing type of work. But yeah.
What is a line producer? That's something that I've always wanted to ask.
A line producer usually is a step above the unit production manager. They basically have created the budget for the show, and they kind of, in concert with the unit production manager, keep the show on track in terms of the budget constraints and things like that. And they're responsible for getting a lot of the contract language in place, and with the unions and with the payroll companies, and just kind of a big logistical kind of producer type, more nuts and bolts versus kind of creative.
Gotcha. I think you're the first person we've had on the show that works in the movie industry. Is that right, Chris?
Yeah, first insider hot takes.
So we're going to go to you, Hendricks, for some insider tips on how this, The Fountain, which was my choice, the 2006 Darren Aronofsky film, that's what we're doing today. What is it? Episode 8, I think. We're almost to the end of season 3. Why did I choose The Fountain? I don't know why. I remember seeing it when it came out, and it made me super angry.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I walked out of the theater, and I had seen Pi, I had seen Requiem at that point. And so I went to go see this, obviously, in the movie theater. And it might have been 2006. I don't even know where I was living. Maybe Wisconsin, maybe North Carolina, who knows? And I walked out just like, what the hell was that? So maybe we can start out with that. What were did you guys see it when it came out? And then what was your initial reaction to The Fountain?
Hell yeah. I saw it when it came out. Not only was it a new Aronofsky joint, but also it had a soundtrack by his usual composer, Clint Mansell, but also Mansell collaborated with Mogwai, the post-rock Scottish band that I was very much obsessed with at the time. And I had a very different reaction. I probably had some, confirmation bias going in, wanting it to be excellent and also I was just I was super into pretentious stuff at the time. And so the more pretentious that something was, the more it vibed with me as a
must have
21-year-old
film.
Exactly. I fell head over heels for it.
Hendricks, did you see it when it came out?
I did. I saw it in the theaters. I might have seen it with a mutual friend of ours named Harry.
Out in Los Angeles?
No. Well, I'm not really sure. There's actually a picture that exists on Facebook of me in the theater that Harry took. And I'm
There's documented evidence.
And I'm very unhappy in the picture. I don't think I was very angry per se, but I was definitely disappointed. Like you both, a big fan of the filmmaker himself, was excited to see a new film from him. The trailers look really interesting. I actually thought that the Clint Mansell score was the best part of the movie, so at least that worked out. But it was profoundly disappointing. Never seemed to deliver, I guess, on kind of what the press was saying kind of at the time, and what the kind of the trailer, the little snippets we were given.
Yeah, the trailer was fantastic, I felt like, and so I was super hyped for it. And I think one of the main reasons I want to revisit it is to see if my opinion has changed, because back then it was kind of a rough watch. I was like, maybe I missed something. And some people say this is like a cult film because it did not do very well at the box office. Mm-hmm. It only made 15 million worldwide, cost $35 million to make, came out in that sort of holiday season of 2006. So it didn't do very well. And I think with time, some people have gone back and rediscovered it because of his newer films that did a lot better, like Black Swan and The Wrestler, and maybe even the more recent Mother. I think people have gone back and seen this and like, oh, maybe there's something here I don't know. So what is the fountain about, Chris? Maybe you want to take that grenade and dive on that.
Yeah, I had my brother-in-law ask me because I was telling him I was watching this, and he's like, "What the heck is that? I've never heard of that." And I was like trying to think of a way to like succinctly summarize it for him, and I basically like verbal diarrheaed out, "Oh, it's about like a conquistador / doctor / celestial astronaut that is trying find the fountain of youth, but also like save his wife, and I don't know if it's really cares more about the cancer or the dying or the mortality." And he's like, "Okay, that sounds interesting." But yeah, it's I mean, the log line is a mess, and it goes like this. A man travels through time on a quest for immortality and to save the woman he loves. As a 16th century conquistador, Tomas searches for the legendary fountain of youth. As a present-day scientist, Tommy desperately struggles to cure the cancer that is killing his wife. Finally, as a 26th century astronaut in deep space. By the way, I don't think we had any time cards, like title cards, anywhere.
Really know what
There's no
centuries, I don't
confirmation of
think.
that at all.
Tom begins to grasp the mysteries of life, love, and death.
Yeah,
I
I mean, even when you see it, you're sort of like, I guess I kind of know what's going on. The big question that people have when they see this, is it all the same person? There's three male, and it's all the same guy.
I disagree. No.
See, now we're already off to a
I
great
think
start.
I think the astronaut and the present day dude are the same. I don't think
the conquistador.
Tomas is.
I think this kind of, I think it's actually, you guys mentioned the log line. For me, and I think we all have the benefit of watching it very recently, so it's kind of fresh in our memories. For me, it's just a grief drama with just kind of a science fiction fantasy overlay, which kind of takes kind of place in her like manuscript or novel that she's writing.
Right. Yeah.
I feel like it's just, but at its heart of it, it's kind of just a present day. My wife is dying, and I'm trying desperately to hold on and save her. And it kind of delves into this kind of, for me at least, it seems like kind of this fantasy dream of his where he's, kind of putting that, I don't know, filter over kind of, what we're actually seeing happen in real time. But
so then do you think, by that estimation, that the celestial astronaut narrative is the final chapter that he writes for her after she dies?
I think so. I guess the final scenes in the film seem to always circle back to him like planting the tree in her present day grave. So, like we don't end on the scientist being kind of, fulfilling his, mission in space or whatever. We end basically on him saying goodbye to his wife and planting a tree. I think at the time when I first saw it, I was really trying to deconstruct it and really trying to confuse the hell out of myself, trying to make it all make sense with that kind of larger meaning where it could be that, he is this, like a Cloud Atlas type of thing where it's like a more immortality time. But I think pared down, perhaps it might not be as deep as, I think it is.
Well, it's funny, like in kind of revisiting this film, when I first saw it, I didn't really go online and check out different theories, but like this pass, I was like, what do people think of this movie? And there are like 10, 12 different interpretations of what the story is actually about, and like whether the conquistador plotline's real or it's part of her book, and if the future part of it with the astronaut, I guess, and his spaceship that's actually a bubble, is that real or is that his imagination? But I do think the story is really grounded in the present day, right? This present day neuroscientist trying to search for a cure that's going to save his wife, and spoiler alert, she dies, and he is not able to do it. But yeah, it's almost like, and I think Aronofsky said that like this movie's kind of his Rubik's Cube. He kind of created it in a way where he wants people to obsess about it and think about it. And a lot of people have done that over the years, the last 15 years, and created all these different theories. It is interesting. So how did this thing really come about? It has a pretty fascinating kind of background, especially on the production side. But I think an important thing to note is that it was co-written by an actual neuroscientist, Ari Handel, who was a roommate of Darren Aronofsky at Harvard. And so he looks like, what else did he write? He produced The Wrestler, Black Swan, and Mother. And you guys have not seen Mother, right?
No.
Okay. And so Ari helped him write The Fountain and Noah. I haven't seen Noah at all. So I don't think have we seen I haven't seen him in his recent stuff, so I don't know if Noah's bad or good. But obviously, you know, Ari had a huge effect on the story and the script and all the sort of scientific aspects to it. But where do we think this thing came from, and how did it get made, essentially?
And that just kind of shows, it just kind of shows that neuroscience was foremost, because there's so many scenes in the lab.
Yes, so many.
Yeah, there's a lot.
I just had to say that, but Chris, please continue.
No, I was going to say that, like, it seemed like there was a lot of mashing up that was part of the genesis of this, because Aronofsky has said in interviews that it began with just the concept of the Fountain of Youth, and that's already just like a huge concept to kind of disentangle into a not only coherent but also engaging narrative. And then he was also reading a lot about like Ponce de Leon and the search for a Fountain of Youth, and like the conquistadors in Spanish politics. And then there's like this, I mean, the kind of imperialism aspect of the story was a lot more front and center for me this time, where it was just like, wait, why? It was really hard to like pick apart and like feel like anything tangible was going on in that particular storyline. But like you said, in the present day, there's such a, like, the thing that I kept noticing that kind of stems from this attempt to mash up, and then bringing on Ari Handel to co-write with him. So then he has that kind of center of the neuroscience, of the lab, of the constant experiments on the monkey Donovan. And you get this really kind of he ends up being able to, and he's done this a lot with his movies, have his cake and eat it too, right? Where he's able to like say that it's purposely disjointed rather than it just kind of being disjointed by the nature of what he's trying to do here. And then also you have like the non-chronological narrative, where you're flipping back and forth between 3 different time periods. And it just seems like this was a classic case of, having a lot of ideas and having what he thought was the money to do those ideas, and then suddenly getting that budget slashed in half. Do you want to tell what exactly happened with the production process here, Dan?
Yeah. Well, even before that, like I was watching one of these interviews. It was like for Movie Phone. I think Rachel Weisz, who plays his wife in the movie, Hugh Jackman's the lead, of course. He gives 3 different answers in a single 5-minute video about what the origin of this was. First, he says, like you stated, the idea of the fountain started with the idea of the Fountain of Youth. Okay, cool. Then he says, an early perception of the film, I wanted to do something in science fiction, and I was also reading a lot about the conquistadors in Mayan culture, and I sort of wanted to figure out a way to unite those 2 stories. Okay, that's weird. And then my favorite answer is, I think it all started with David Bowie's Space Oddity, Ground Control to Major Tom, and trying to flesh out and visualize that song, and then somehow the Fountain of Youth came up in Ponce de Leon. So there's a lot of, and that's in a single interview. He talks about 3 different, like
he's basically saying, like, I wanted to make 3 movies, but they said I could only make 1.
But you know what? It reminds me of somebody like being in a dorm room and being just like super high. And just being like, what if we made a movie about Mayans and then David Bowie's Space Odyssey and Ponce de Leon or whatever? That's kind of how it feels like. I don't think the end results are that far off of where, if you took that idea to fruition, where it would go. But ultimately, it's essentially, you want to make a movie about the Fountain of Youth. He also makes this crazy claim. I don't know if you guys can like refute this. There's no other movie about the Fountain of Youth. Has there not been another major film about the Fountain of Youth before 2006? I feel like there has to be.
I mean,
in any event,
I would be
he makes the claim there wasn't.
There wasn't. I mean,
I would argue Cocoon.
That's true. Yeah.
And Cocoon too.
Yeah, there's always some sort of like search for eternal life, right? I mean, that's kind of the whole thing, Holy Grail, that kind of stuff. In any event, and this is where I want to sort of kind of defer to Hendricks here on this production side of things, because we don't really have a background in movie production and how it actually works. The story here is essentially that Warner Brothers greenlit the film originally with Brad Pitt in the lead role and Kate Blanchett as the wife. That everything's going well. They're going to shoot down in Australia. Then 7 weeks before they shot, there's like 1,500 people down there. They're ready to do this thing. Brad Pitt pulls out. And it's never really clear exactly why he pulled out. There's sort of this vague explanation that Brad Pitt didn't like the script. But it's like, if you're 7 weeks before, I don't know, Hendricks, what do you think? Does that sound like an actual excuse there?
It's interesting because Brad Pitt is actually a big producer now.
He is, yeah, he's massive.
And I'm not sure. I'm not going to venture to say that he was getting into producing his own stuff that early. I mean, I'd have to we'd have to look it up, but I think Chris kind of touched upon it, and you touched upon it too, Daniel. You both touched upon kind of the genesis of this project and what screenplay would have come out of those story ideas. And maybe he did get cold feet and took a look at it and said, like, this might not be the right time for me to do this, because at that point, I think also in his career, even though he was a big star, again, he might have had other things on his horizon that he was eyeing that just kind of divided his attention. So I guess we'll never really know.
Yeah. It's interesting too. Like Aronofsky basically said,
team up on Benjamin Buttons. That's actually interesting.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Yeah, another agent.
He would. So I think later on, Aronofsky basically said, like, why did this happen? He said about the falling out with Brad Pitt, or I don't even know if it was a falling out. I think creatively we grew apart. By the time it was ready to go, it wasn't ready to go, and so it fell apart. He also says the only reason this film was happening was because of Brad. So I think you're kind of Hendricks hinting at it's his producer type.
It's a very
role.
Experimental film in many ways, and you need a bankable star like Brad Pitt to get that kind of a budget. So to get like the 70 million or something, however much it was greenlit for, you need to Pitt behind that, because otherwise it's not going to sell tickets automatically.
Right?
Yeah, 100%. Like originally, I think it was 70. Then they upped it to 100.
Yikes.
And then after it fell apart, and what's interesting too, I thought, was that it was already delayed a year after Brad Pitt dropped out because Kate Blanchett got pregnant, and so they had to delay the filming a year. Is that a norm that happens, Hendricks? Where if
they were very. It seems like from what you say, they were very close to production. If they're 7 weeks out from the start of principal photography. They've been in light pre-production for months, and then they probably, are starting, especially with the kind of effects and editing work and stuff like that. They've got all those people lined up, at least, contracted. And I think that 7 weeks is in other words, is very, 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 very close. And so it is a big deal. They spent some money already. And then now if you're going to try to redo it, you have to take into account that you've already spent some money on it with nothing to show for it.
I think they had already spent like $15 million or something like that in pre-production costs.
I mean, because they were probably, that effects work and design work, that has to start ahead of time. Obviously, and then again, and it's a location shoot from what I'm hearing.
Down in Australia. Originally,
you got a crew up down there. That takes time. At the time, Australia probably was not quite as much of a production hub as it is now, especially in relationship with its relationship with New Zealand being close to, where there's a lot of people down there now. It's the same thing with here in like Georgia and New Mexico. There are now big hubs all around the country with seasoned professionals, but it might not have been the case in 2006, 2005.
You know what? I'm just finding out, doing some quick Googling about what Brad Pitt was up to around that same time, 2005. He actually, his first feature narrative film, he had produced a documentary the year before, but his first feature film that he produced was The Departed, which came out in 2006 and was filming it by spring of 2005. And I mean, I can definitely see a scenario where like Pitt's, trying to help Aronofsky make his big splash after, Requiem puts him on the map, and then Marty comes along and says, "Hey, can you help me out with this?" And I mean, which one would you choose, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, it's also fascinating too, like clearly people are pissed off because like the crew of the Fountain wrote a letter that leaked on, remember 88
Right.
Cool News? You guys remember that? Back in the
Unfortunately.
day?
Yeah.
I love the quote from this letter. So this is the crew writing about Brad Pitt. What amazes us is that it appears Brad Pitt has no real understanding of the impact of his decision. Now only 7 weeks from shooting, we estimate there is over 1,500 people here in Australia, including family and children, who are now displaced and unemployed.
Yikes.
The writers said that Aronofsky has encouraged us to voice our anger at Pitt's decision. Darren's like a real kind of, he's an
Burning
interesting
bridges.
guy. Yeah, he likes that drama, I feel
Oh,
like. And
yeah.
we'll see that later in some of the reception for the film. But sort of the narrative there is that like a huge budget, 100 million. Brad Pitt drops out. Warner Brothers is like, okay, we're not doing this now. They're basically, hey, do you want to do Batman Begins? And Aronofsky says no. He's like, I'm not doing that. And then they give it to Christopher Nolan. I think there's a lot of parallels between those two guys. I don't know why. I guess they're like the auteur, like kind of do more experimental, different stuff with, but he turns down Batman Begins, which would be a really interesting, I think, movie. And he just continues to obsess about this film. I think it's also important to note that Aronofsky has said he thinks my biggest expression of what I believe is in The Fountain. He said that in 2014. So this was a very, very important film to him. And so he rewrote the script, I think, pared it down a lot, and got Warner Brothers to give him $35 million. And then he got Hugh Jackman. And I think the one thing we haven't mentioned either is that the female lead, Rachel Weisz, was his girlfriend, and I think almost they may have been like fiance, but probably right around when they got married, this film came out. I think that's important to know. It comes up in one of the reviews as well. He put his girlfriend in the movie. They end up getting married, so there's something there, right? But he gets these people, he gets them on board, gets $35 million, which is not a small amount of money, right, to make a film.
Well,
and
comparatively, it had to sting a little.
This kind of, I think, this kind of film, though, it shows where the 35 million kind of had to go and couldn't.
Right.
You'll notice that a lot of the sets are small, probably green screened. There aren't a lot of big exterior shots and things like that. Yeah. The night scenes, everything's pretty dimly lit. You can't really see very far into a lot of these environments. And of course, the cast is pared down to pretty much the bare minimum. So I think that what you're talking about, how the budget got pared down, it shows on the screen. It really does. I think it's noticeable.
Probably my favorite part is that like we leave the conquistador storyline for a long time after he agrees with the queen that he'll go and search for the Fountain of Youth, and then the next time we see them is like there's 6 guys huddled together in a dark space being like, well, we've lost all our men.
Well, it's funny because like we have the benefit of the New York Times being on set with him when he was shooting it, and they were up in Montreal. This is the new budget, the $35 million budget. And he talks about one of the conquistador scenes where it was like, in the original version, this would have cost us $15 million.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about him is that like he shot Pi, his first film, for $60K.
Sure.
Right. And it looks amazing for $60K.
Looks good.
I was also blown away. And I think someone fact check me on this. I don't know what the budget was for Requiem, but I want to say it was like $4 million. Maybe even less. It was tiny.
Great oral history of the whole thing recently, and they probably said it like 10 times in that.
Yeah, $4.5 million. Yeah,
$4.5 million. I mean, that movie looks amazing, right?
Right.
And it's not dark all the time, like dimly lit all the time either.
So he's used to having not a lot of money, right, and making use of what he has for that cash and making it work for him. And so so that's the production. He gets it made. This thing comes out. What's the response, Chris? What was the critical response here?
Well, he was not shy about making catty comments in the press in response to various critics. Probably the more notable one was the Variety review was pretty negative by Leslie Felprin, and he said in IndieWire a number of years later not only did she attack the film, she attacked me. People in social media attack you for everything you've done. That happens all the time. But a critic should be focused on what's at hand, not attack someone's career and say their past films are overrated and say they have no ability. She clearly had an issue with me as a person and what I was putting out there as my stories, so that bothered me. Probably if I ever met her, it wouldn't be a good day.
What does that mean? Is that a threat?
I know, threatening women in
threatening?
IndieWire. What the hell?
I love the
it's
quote
just-
in The Guardian too. It's like,
Yes.
where he's like talking about negative critics, and this is like ridiculous. He goes, "I know we're going to get attacked by some cynics, but it is time for some sincerity and just to talk about the things that make us human."
Oh boy.
I mean, come on, Darren.
Yeah,
What's going on, man?
He's a sensitive man.
I do.
He's
think that-
super sensitive.
I do think I've read more than one critical review of any filmmaker where they do go on their past work or, and say, make a comment like,
Yeah.
they lost a step or something like that, or
Yeah.
Right.
usually the filmmaker gets a little, usually they'll put blurbs about the filmmaker and, their vision and art and how it might have not been as successful this time. So I don't know.
Right. And it's and I remember there was a lot of this too when Black Swan came out, even though that had a much better critical reception. And obviously it was probably the worst of his career when Mother came out, because that film was so incredibly divisive. But it seems like it's not even so much like there's lots of auteurs, even those in his own generation that, have their big drops and they take it with a plum and they're like whatever, but he seems to like lack a kind of self-awareness about he just like he wants everybody to automatically assume that he's like doing everything he can, and it's hard to do that when you don't know like a lot of the backstory, and also you're making a freaking movie that has like a conquistador and a celestial astronaut in the same story. So it's frustrating that he's like kind of put on blinders to that, which also I think is part of the side effect of like making a really good movie for such cheap money, 2 really good movies for such cheap money, and knocking it out of the park. He probably had a pretty big ego, and it all started crumbling down when Brad Pitt said no thanks.
Yeah. I mean, when it came out, critics were not that happy with it, right? All critics on Rotten Tomatoes, 52%, 60 out of 100, which is not good. Top critics was 28%, 45 out of 100. Metacritic was 51 out of 100. Those are pretty terrible scores, just from, people who do it for a living. The audience score is right now is at 74% on Rotten Tomatoes, 76 out of 100, which is it's okay. Letterboxd, I was surprised because Letterboxd is what film nerds, film snobs. I thought they would have this higher. They have it at 70. Which is kind of in between decent and good. For a Letterboxd film, as long as you're like the mid 70s, they really like the movie. In this case, it's on the lower end of that. IMDb at a 72. I think to no surprise, the Cinemascore is C-, which is horrifically bad. Yeah. Not as bad though as Mother, which did get the dreaded F.
The F.
And I did see that opening weekend, I believe, on a Sunday morning in Nashville in the suburbs, and it was I think we had 6 walkouts out of 12 people. And this is kind of a little bit of a precursor to that sort of experience in that film, where, like you said, like Mother is extremely decisive to the point where you're going to get walkouts. I don't think a lot of people walked out of the fountain.
No,
they probably walked out very befuddled. Like, I don't what just happened.
They might have fallen asleep in the fountain because it's dull.
Oh, I was gonna make a comment about that. He keeps falling asleep reading his dead wife's manuscript, and I'm like, I hear you, buddy.
It's dull. The movie is. It was only an hour and 36 minutes. And I felt every minute of it. It is dull.
I know. It's one of the few 90-some minute movies where you can't say it was a tight 90.
Just going back to like the central story is, of course, again, scientist trying to save his dying wife, right?
Yeah.
There's not a lot of chemistry between the two of them, and the story itself, the kind of romance that you're supposed to kind of have underneath it's just not really that interesting. They love each other, but that's it. That's all I get. I don't get a sense of history or even shared common interests. Like, she's off in her book land all the time, and he could care less.
He's off like prodding monkeys. Like, what is he doing? The critic responses to this movie was there are a lot of great ones. The negative ones are the most funny by far. So I'll start with those. Guys like Darren Aronofsky give auteurs a bad name. That's Peter Howell from the Toronto Star. What else do we have here? How can so much style, talent, and money be squandered in the service of such blatant airheadedness? That is Sandra Hall of the Sydney Morning Herald. I think the one that really, I think the reaction I like the most is Michael Atkinson from Sight and Sound, which is a great magazine over in England. It's difficult to recall another American film that in pursuing a passionate and personal vision goes so maddeningly, uproariously wrong. To me, that hits the nail on the head, because ultimately we've kind of established this was a very personal film to Darren Aronofsky, right? He fought to get this made. He turned down huge franchise films like Batman Begins to do this. And for years he was focused on this film. And the final result is something so messy and muddled and emotionally inert that it just has that sort of, he became too obsessed. He got tunnel vision on this story, how he saw it, but he couldn't see it how anybody else was going to see it. It just has that sort of almost mad scientist feel to it.
He was becoming the protagonist in Pi, creating this movie.
Exactly.
I actually don't know if more money would have solved the problems either. Like, even if he had gotten Brad Pitt, even if he had gotten Brad Pitt and his $100 million, $70 million, whatever it is, like, I just don't think there's enough there as is, and I just don't see how. I don't have confidence that there was more.
I do have to say, I feel like I have to put a plug in because it was the one of the three of us that really loved this movie when it came out. And I do think that there are some quotes here from critics that I respect and like a lot that kind of get at least that feeling that I definitely did not feel as often, or definitely not as conclusively as I did back in 2006 when it was released, but I still felt glimmers of, especially in the second half of the film. The first half was a real struggle for me to get through, but I'd say like right around the point where when Rachel Weisz dies, I guess, is when I'm like, all right, now it finally felt like it started, because then it's like he can actually like do things, and there's more of like the transitioning between the different ridiculous storylines. But I like Helen O'Hara's quote from Empire. Her benevolent review said, "At heart, this is a simple Zen fable about love and death. In execution, it's a complex and gorgeous mini epic with sterling performances from its 2 stars." And the first sentence of that quote, anyways, goes back to what you were saying, Drax, where like if you can just like simplify what this movie is essentially about, then perhaps you can understand it a little more and maybe even appreciate it a little more. Yeah, and I will say, even though I don't think I agree with you that they did not have chemistry at all, Jackman and Weisz, I do think that they were giving it their all. Then those are the 2 actors that they usually always do. While I did not very much believe Jackman in all 3 different roles, I very much believed Weisz as both the Queen of Spain and this like rando writer that loves the first day of snow, and that's pretty much all we know about her in the present day version.
Admittedly, though, the Queen of Spain wasn't given a whole lot to do, but say please go across the world and find the Tree of Life for me, and then get back. We can hook. I think that was generally her, generally what she did. You bring up a good point, Chris. I mean, I try not to be too harsh. I still maintain that they didn't have a whole lot of chemistry, but as far as being actors, they both did a fantastic job acting. So
I mean,
they were definitely trying,
they were. Well, I think that's the thing about it too is, I don't want to be like super negative about the movie. I clearly didn't like it when it came out. I think I hated it even more when I saw it this time. But you can't deny the ambition.
Oh, no.
Right. There's no way you can deny that.
We talked about this last week with Cherry, as ridiculous as that movie was. And I think Mark Kermode of BBC had probably the best quote, my favorite quote anyways, about the movie, in which he said, and this kind of gets at the heart of both ends of the spectrum, bonkers, adventurous, silly, ambitious, charming, foolish. It's all those things, and it'll be gone in a week. But it's not mainstream bore fare, and for that, it should be celebrated. And like,
Yeah.
I do remember really feeling that, like being able to like just go to like the multiplex downtown and see this movie, like, and probably like Wrong Turn was in the theater next to it, and Stealth was in the other one.
Movie.
I don't know.
I think I saw that in the theaters too.
Yeah, I did see that in theaters. I had a lot better time than this. But no, there's something to be said for, going for it, swinging for the fences. And sometimes it works. I think it worked probably better in Cherry when we watched it last week. And what's interesting too about this film is, do you think that, especially for people who are younger, who weren't, going to see movies when it came out, think of Zoomers or under 25, when they see this thing, are they going to see it in a completely different way than we are? Are they going to like love it because it's so adventurous and kind of all over the place?
Mm-hmm.
It's because it's like just like different narratives strung together essentially, in the quick cuts. They're all into like YouTube editing, so they must love it, right? What do you think? Is there going to be a legacy for this film? Is it going to be a cult film in 10 years, 20 years, when we're like, whenever we're 80 years old? Are people going to look back and be like, oh wow, you remember The Fountain? Is this going to be play at like midnight movies, movie theaters? What do you think?
I mean, I think it's designed for fans of the director at this point. I mean, if you are if you're really into his work, and you're, of a younger generation, you'll find it. And, maybe they'll find something. I don't know. The movie's been out for so long, so it might be hard to imagine, but maybe they'll find something in it that, hasn't been talked about so much. But I don't, I think my sister is technically a Zoomer, and I don't know if she would. I think she would find it quite dull.
Yeah, I don't think that. I don't think there's a lot of shelf life here, and I think that a big part of that is not with its experimental nature, which I think is probably the only thing it has going for it in terms of shelf life. But like I was kind of alluding to earlier, both with like the incredible like patriarchal point of view as well as the incredible imperialist point of view, like neither of those play well with Zoomers today anyways. So like I don't think that anybody's gonna see this and think it's anything more than just like a masturbatory fantasy, which it is. So like
but so gorgeous, such a gorgeous fantasy.
I mean, I will say, like, when that part where the screen goes black in the final scene where he ascends Zabulbia to whatever the fucking nebula,
basically.
Yeah. And the like the score cuts out and then comes back in with guitars. Oh my god!
It's
I
good.
still
It's good. I'm with Chris on that. That was the best part of the movie.
But it was perhaps only good if you're like super into like Perfect Circle music videos or something like that.
And you kind of like, when you place this in his sort of film history, it is what was kind of a stepping stone to his biggest hits, right? Black Swan and The Wrestler. What has happened, where do we think Darren's going here? Because he did Noah. Was Noah a hit? I don't remember. No, it couldn't have been a hit.
It was a huge hit, but it was an epic film. Like, they gave him the money and the stars on that.
Yeah,
so
I haven't seen that.
I haven't seen it, unfortunately, but he got what he wanted with that one, in the sense that he got money and big names.
$359 worldwide on a 160 budget.
Wait, 59 worldwide?
359.
Oh, okay. So that's not terrible. That's not too bad.
Might kind of be like breaking even in the abstract, depending on the advertising.
Yeah, depending on
not a runaway hit, but not a big.
Yeah. And then he does Mother, which neither of you guys have seen, correct?
Nope.
Or its exclamation point.
Mother, I will say this. Like, Mother is one of those films where I feel like Mother's going to be a cult film without a doubt.
Like, I see that to be more likely, and I haven't even seen it.
Yeah, because it's just like, what was he? This also cost about $30 million. Mother did. Did 44 worldwide. Where do we think Darren's going? Is his sort of golden period, or whatever you want to call it, like his golden age with The Wrestler and Black Swan, which were both commercial successes and huge critical successes, and then Requiem 2 and Pi. Is he going to come back with something, or is he going to go down this weird path where he's not going to make anything super interesting or great again. What do you guys
Well,
think?
he's kind of been doing this back and forth between like batshit movies and more traditional films.
Yeah.
You know, and probably the last, Noah's a little batshit, but there's a lot of bankability there with both the stars and the biblical sense of it. But like, I think The Fountain kind of made him realize that if he wanted to do something batshit, he had to do it in a way that like got people talking, and so that's why then he made Mother. And coming up next, he's got an untitled project about a obese English teacher who
I think it's called The Whale.
Oh, okay.
Oh, he has titled it.
Yeah,
Okay.
I got some details on it. Let's
About
see
an
what we got.
obese English teacher who's like trying to reconnect with his teenage daughter who's estranged from him, right?
Yeah,
Which is like as like traditional indie bullshit as you can get.
Guess who the star is?
Oh, God,
Brendan Fraser.
What?
Yes, Brendan Fraser, production company A24.
Oh boy, he's back.
So he's
baby.
going back to his roots. I feel like he's going back to like the indie darling. He's running away from the mainstream.
It sounds like that will be a moderately budgeted piece, so it's kind of a low risk, high reward type of thing if it does hit in some way, shape, or form. I remember.
I almost feel, well, I don't know. I think he's better in that stuff, right? I don't know.
Yeah,
like I feel like he's better. Yeah, Wrestler was pretty low budget, wasn't it?
Yeah, it had to be. I mean,
yeah, it had to be. It's like anytime he gets more than like $30 million to do something, he just blows it on this ridiculous stuff.
Back around the time that we're talking about, around 2006, there were a couple other filmmakers that were working that kind of did similar things in the sense of how it worked. You had Soderbergh and Nolan both working there, and they would do kind of like an indie kind of experimental show, and then they do a big budget show so they could do the next indie experiment.
Right.
For Soderbergh, that's always worked out for him for decades.
Yeah,
great. Nolan, it's a little more. He doesn't do as many kind of smaller budgeted things anymore. But originally he would dabble.
Yeah, it's kind of like, is that like a one for you, one for me type thing?
I mean, I don't know exactly what people's deals are and if they have like first look type of things or whatever. But with Soderbergh, at least when I was working in a casting office while they were doing like Ocean's 13, and that was kind of the rumor that was going around. He does these big Ocean's movies. He'd done 3 of them, which is pretty. For Soderbergh, it's a lot of sequels. And he had done 3 of them. I think because they allow him the creative freedom then to kind of turn around and say, okay, can I go off and do this thing that's really important to me, like The Informant or something like that?
Right.
So we'll see. It sounds like he's going back to the indie route.
I think Darren might have something still left.
I think he's a great filmmaker.
The Wrestler wasn't too long ago, in my memory at least. It might be in actual years, but I don't think that he's
he's not washed up. Huh?
I think that the things that he was interested in, when he was making stuff like Black Swan and The Wrestler, I don't think those things have atrophied completely. I think that there's still something there.
Something's still ticking there.
I guess I'm an optimist.
Yeah, I think you're an optimist. I think he's done. I think he's absolutely done. I think he's like a pitcher that blew out his arm. Like his game's over.
I think it could go either way. That's my official take.
Any closing thoughts on The Fountain at all? I would say this: like, if you're interested, you've never seen it before, and you're into stuff that's a little bit different, experimental, absolutely see this. It's worth seeing because it's a really fascinating film that's different. Is it a good story? No. Does it hold together all that much? Not really. But I think if you're interested in film and film production, it's worth checking out just because it's an interesting film at the end of the day. Any closing thoughts, Hendricks or Chris, about The Fountain?
Just buy the soundtrack. Listen to that.
Don't watch the movie, buy the soundtrack.
You come full circle. I said Clint Mansell's probably the best thing in the movie, but no, I agree with you. I think I agree with you both on it's kind of strengths and weaknesses, and I'll just say that yeah, I mean, as a fan of film, I think one viewing is warranted.
One and no more than one.
Well,
Yeah,
that was going to be my plan until you guys started this podcast. Now I'm on two, so
We screwed it up.
We screwed it up.
but
Well,
talented people making a film that's interesting to see once.
There
awesome. Well, Ryan, we really appreciate you having coming on to Film Trace. It's been fantastic to get your perspective, your professional perspective, which we love.
Thank you again.
Chris, what do we have?
Weeks to see what else you guys are talking about.
Oh yeah,
definitely. What are we talking about?
You're gonna want to tune in next week, Dre. No, you're not. I don't know. I was struggling. I've been going back and forth between a bunch of different picks, and I think I'm landing finally on the upcoming Casey Affleck picture, Every Breath You Take. There's a lot of talk going on about this film, and it is probably going to be a little bit of a mess, but in hopefully an interesting way. I'm looking for an interesting story behind the film so we can trace its roots, life, and death, just kind of like how Jackman was doing in The Fountain. We are going to have that ready for you next week. It's on VOD right now.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks for listening. This has been Film Trace.